When I started talking about the pineapple story, really, the thing started long before that. As a matter of fact, it started right at the first day we came to that mission field there in New Guinea. I won't easily forget that first morning I woke up, savages all around the house, yelling and shouting. And we had been so tired. We traveled so far the night before, the day before, that I woke up at a start. They were all there to be paid for unloading the boat and the things that we'd brought with us in there. I was so glad there was an older missionary there with me who had brought the boat up. And I thought, well, as long as he's here, I've got somebody to lean on. He's a veteran. But, of course, he didn't know the language of his people, so it wasn't much good. And now, of course, I didn't know it neither. But I opened the door, and there stood this crowd of people yelling at me with their hands out. Everybody in the village was there. Now, I'm supposed to pay him for unloading the boat, but I didn't have a clue who to pay. I know there wasn't that many items to carry, and there was at least 300 people there. And so who am I supposed to pay? And as Dutch people, we don't pay people for not working. And this was a hardship to me through the years because I was so tight on things that when I tried to figure out who worked, they were all with their hands out. And I'm trying to find out, and I can't find out because we couldn't communicate. So I hesitate. And when I hesitate, they think I'm not going to do it. So the pressure comes on. That's the way they do it, all the group pressure against an individual. And so they yelled, and they got tougher, and they start shaking their spears. And I thought, I've got to get Chuck out here. This guy, maybe he knows. He was at the boat handing it to him. And I said, Chuck, come on out here. I said, what do I do? He didn't want to come out. I said, what do I do? He says, pay them all. Pay them all, Otto. I said, well, they didn't all work. He said, so what? What are you saving it for? He says, if you're not going to be here, you won't need anything. I should have really given them everything I had that first day. But half of them went home just laughing, this missionary, we got this stuff. Then stood the guys that must have really worked, and they looked at what the others got, and they got the same thing. And they were, one group of angry people outside my door. And their demonic eyes, and man, it just made chills go up and down your spine, and I didn't know what to do. You know what I did? I pointed at the, told them to go away. Of course, they don't point with their finger, they point with their chin, so they didn't know what I was always showing my finger for. And so I just went in the house and I locked the door as if that was going to help. It's on post. They could get a fire underneath it and get you out real quick. And, there's no windows. There's just mosquito screens. And I was pale. I met Carol inside the kitchen door. She says, what's happening? I said, Carol, I think we're going to set a record. Martyred the first day in. That's got to be a record. And now you don't say that to your wife, man. I found out later that's no way to but, man, it really shook me up. That was my first encounter. And I didn't know anything about rights, you see. I had learned that. And so I was hanging on. We had breakfast. Chuck said the water's going down. The tide is, we're 100 miles up this river. See, and there's still a 13-foot tide. He says, the tide's down. I can't buck the tide. I've got to leave right now. I hated to see him go. He's going to leave me there. And I wanted to go with him so bad. I was a quitter after one night. But I walked him down to the river. He's a big guy. He puts his hand on my shoulder. And he says, Otto, now remember, all these natives are with us. The flies, the mosquitoes, the bugs, and they never bathe. It all comes along. Wherever there's people, there's all kinds of things swarming. So two of us, foreigners in one village, they all followed us down the river. And then he, in the middle of this throng of people, Chuck, before he gets on the boat, puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, Otto, be very careful with all your dealings with these people because they're the most unpredictable people on the whole southern swamplands. No, he shouldn't have told me that and got on his boat. You know what I mean? And so he said, you can't predict them. See, he was here with that other missionary a year before he built that house that we moved in. And that other missionary lasted nine months. And so he said, be very careful in all your dealings with these people. He was referring to the mess I made that morning and almost got us all burned out. And he said, now, Be very careful. Everything you do, pray before you do anything. And then he said, now, I'm going to pray for you before I get on the boat. Hey, this guy's got faith. He bows, he closes his eyes. Now, I happen to know that you can pray with your eyes open. And I mean, this guy's around with these spears. I mean, I don't know how many of you would have that kind of faith. Of course, with your eyes open, you would, well, what good would that do anyway? But I peeked around as he was praying, and I was listening to him, and he said, oh, God, somehow, help Konings. He shouldn't have put all these somehows in there. It told me he didn't believe it himself. Somehow help him to, I don't know what he said, but I remember those somehows. I went back to the house, and I couldn't get this off. I couldn't hold it. I had to share this with somebody who was on my wife. I said, Carol, you know what? These are the most unpredictable people in the whole island. Now, he had said on the southern swamplands, but it hit me like they were the worst people in the whole world. And I said, they put us here. Well, the mission took care of us, though. They sent over another missionary to help us get orientated. He was in the Eastern Ayu, different language, but and then when he left, we were supposed to prove to the whole world we were good missionaries, and we didn't even want to prove it anymore. But because I'm Dutch, and us Dutchmen, we hang in there. We're stubborn. We don't want to quit. I didn't want to quit because my father said to me, you'll never amount to anything. And so I had to prove somewhere along the line that I was worth something, so I couldn't quit. And so, we started off trying to learn language, and it was a mess. And then my wife got sick on me. Now, I didn't think that was fair. She got hepatitis. Now, I had to wean this baby. We had this brand new baby. How old was the baby? About 6 weeks old. She says, all right. And so now I had to, she was sick. She couldn't feed the baby anymore. So I had to put him on this bottle. Now, my wife had this Playtex bottle. Playtex bottles are terrible things. Don't ever allow those into your house. You can't be a Christian and own one of those at the same time. I tried, honestly. This thing, they're plastic sacks, okay? Do they still have them? I wonder. Yeah, they do. And they have plastic sacks, and we had to have this contraption. You had to get this plastic sack on this spring loader, and then you got to get it on there and jam it in, and it transfers. I understand that maybe the new ones are better than that. I hope they are. But this thing it's absolutely no good. It leaks on both ends because my baby would pinch the bottom. We'd lost that bottom thing that's supposed to be. I don't know where it was. Anyway, what a mess this bottle was. And now I had this, my wife says you have to heat the milk to a certain temperature. I had this terrible stove, a kerosene stove, that was left over from the other missionary. It had rusted. It was gravity fed. There was a tank up here and a copper tube down here. It was one of them temperamental things. Either all the kerosene would come at once or none would come at all. One of them. And oh, what a mess this stove was. And I tried to fix this stove I'm not a mechanic. I would have traded in all my theological studies for some mechanical ability at this point. And I couldn't get that stove. I took it apart, folks, and it was complicated. 3 burners on the top, 2 on the bottom. There was a little oven that sat on there, but it was a terrible thing. And it had more parts in it. For a wick stove, the thing should have been very simple. But it had more little wicks and screens and valves and tubes and all the dirty, and I blow through them and clean it out and put it. But it never. Those engineers, whoever made it, they didn't do a good job. They never allowed for all the parts. I could never get them all back in again. It was bad. And so I'd leave out whatever I thought wasn't necessary. And I find out that sometimes the smallest pieces are the most important. Did some of you mechanics know that? That fires. That thing went on fire. And I had this big 55-gallon drum there with rice sacks soaking wet that I could just blanket the whole thing at once. So I was a one-man fire brigade. I had to be. I almost burned the house down the first time. Oh, it was terrible. And so I'm fussing with this bad stove. And then this baby bottle, the milk had to be warmed on this stove. Can you imagine it? Now, my first child was a screamer. I don't know if you've ever had a screamer in your house. He wakes himself up screaming, wakes everybody else up. He woke the natives up, too. And that was bad, because now I had them out the door screaming at me, too. I've got them screaming on the inside and the outside, and I don't know who to shut up first. And that's now. And now Satan comes at me, says, you didn't have your devotions this morning. Don't let Satan pull that one on you. I mean, hey, you know, sure, before I was married, I could have my devotions in the morning. Sure, I was, you know what I mean? Well, you don't have the children. Don't get me wrong, young lady. You know, when the children come along, they scream at you, okay? And sometimes the wife will, too. But, you know, I'm in a mess. So he says, nothing's going to go right today because you haven't had your devotions. Well, what kind of talk is that? But I fell for that. Yeah, that's right. I didn't have my devotions. I didn't have my devotions yesterday neither, or the day before. And so it wasn't real good anymore. And so he said, everything's going to go wrong. And it was going wrong. So I started believing Satan. Now that's, when you believe Satan's lies, then you become vulnerable to him. Then he gets a hold in your mind. And I didn't know anything about that. But anyway, that milk, it was powdered milk. It had come from Australia. It was a long time coming, no doubt about it, because by the time it got back there in the jungle, it was hard. I had to pound it with a hammer. I pounded the milk to get it, small enough to mix. You know what I mean? So I'm pounding this milk. I never get it. And then you got to get it to go through that baby bottle. It was bad. It was just a bad situation all the way. Now I'm pounding the milk while this baby's screaming at me, and that gets to me. You know what I mean? Just shut up. I'm fixing the milk. You know what I mean? But he won't shut up until you get something in his tummy. And what a mess. So I'm pounding the milk and kicking the stove. I did. I tried to warm that milk up, and once I threw the bottle at the stove, I thought I'll get both of them at once. I'm not given to anger, but this stove really brought it out. It was the circumstances. I beat the stove, and I threw the bottle at the baby once. It was bad, folks. And I know it doesn't sound. I am a Christian. I am saved, although my story today will not. You would doubt, and you once that don't know me well that are new here, please accept this. I was born again 12 years before this. But anyway, I couldn't. You know what? Those of you parents here, those of you that have little children, don't let those kids push you around. If they get hungry enough, they'll take it cold. And I just fed that baby to. I mean, hey, just bypass your problems. You know, I was running away from the problem, but then he was still screaming, and I asked my wife what those little bottles of baby food that she had brought. When do we start on those? This kid is hungry. And she says, well, a few more weeks. Well, she didn't know I was already giving him some of those. And I just wanted to check. I said, when I start, how much do I give him? She says, well, a little half a jar of this and half a jar. I was going to give him a couple whole jars. And never heating it at all. I mean, just giving it to him cold. Just keep him from crying. You know, if you feed it to him fast enough, he hasn't got a chance to cry in between. But you have to burp him after that. I sure found that out. But you know, and then what a mess, folks. Then I dumped the baby in bed with my wife, and I'd go outside, try to take care of this gang. And I was already angry, you see, to start with. But anyway, what a mess it was. So several times I tried to fix this stove to no avail. The fires kept getting bigger. The more I touched it, the more mess it was. And I finally said, Lord, I can't do it. I can't fix it. I thought, you know what made it so bad? This stove was made by Philips, a Dutch stove. How could any Dutchman be so dumb to make a stove like that? That really got me. But you know, I finally realized I couldn't fix it, so I started praying over it. I laid my hands on the stove one day. I didn't have to anoint it with oil. There was oil all over the place anyway. And I pray. When the baby finally goes to sleep in the afternoon, I kneeled by that stove, putting my Bible on the stove, trying to thought something might rub off. I know there wasn't much for me to rub off, but maybe the Word of God. But I never got that thing healed. It never did work. And so I'm struggling out. I'm outside with this big black pot. And I opened fire. All the natives now standing around coughing and sneezing, and they got TB, they got all the diseases. And I have no lid to this pot, and I'm trying to cook my rice because I can't cook it inside. And these guys are getting their dirty sticks. See, they want some of the rice in exchange for the firewood. So they get their sticks, and they're going to help themselves with their dirty sticks. I said, get your sticks out of my pot. Quit coughing near. I'm becoming like a nurse. I'm starting to see germs. Oh, what a mess. And then the cooking wasn't all that good. So my wife stayed sick. She was sick 9 months that first year. What a mess this was. And I'm trying to cook this food and do all this work and try to give out the medicine. And so now the radio, there was a two-way radio. The Coast MEF base or my mission board would call us the roll call in the morning. And so they'd say, go down the line, Jufo, there was mine. Jufo, I'd say, Jufo standing by. How's things going, Otto? I'd say, fine. Now, why did I say that? Do you ever do that? That's terrible. And I'm losing it. My wife is sick. My baby, my people are all angry. My nerves are at edge. I don't know how long I can last, but I'm hanging in there. You know, I thought it can't get any worse. It can only get better, you see? And so you have hope. But I'd say, fine, and they always marveled. See, when Chuck went home with that boat, after he left us there the first day, he went back to his wife, Bernita. Bernita later became my wife's good friend. And she said to Bernita, she told her that 10 years later. She said, you know, when Chuck came home that first day, he was weeping. He's got the gift of mercy. He says, Bernita, we've got to pray like there was never. Those two are so green. I don't know why they ever sent them out here. He says, we've got to pray. I don't give them three weeks, or they'll be out of there. Those Ayu will drive them right out of that place. And Bernita said to my wife 10 years later, she says, it's amazing. It was amazing. We prayed our hearts out for you. But then when you said on the radio, fine, you're doing fine every day, we thought maybe that you were different people than what we had seen, and that there was much more to you, so we quit praying so hard. When you tell people everything's fine, you're facing your problems alone. And Christianity was never made to face alone. We're one body. The hand can't make it, folks. The eye can't make it. It needs the foot and it needs the ear. Friends, and when we say we're doing all right, everything's fine, and things aren't, then you're cutting yourself off from the prayers of God's people, and you're in this thing alone like a hand without the foot, and you're going to hurt and you're going to go down. And that's the culture we're living in. Hey, but I'm not going to tell the whole island I'm losing it after a few weeks. You know what I mean? Everybody stands by for the road call, not only our mission, all the other missions. That's the only news you get. And so I'm not going to broadcast all over the world that I'm losing it and that I'm finished. And so every day I say, fine. And the radio, the battery needs to be charged. And I had this little Briggs & Stratton gasoline battery charger. Don't ever get a Briggs & Stratton gasoline engine. They'll ruin your Christianity if you have any left. I mean, this is terrible. I pulled that thing to charge my battery. The natives start talking to me. Tuan, why don't they send us a smart missionary? You've been pulling that thing all morning. The other missionary pulled it one time. Oh, man, I tried to tell them I had a BA degree. I guess they didn't know what that was. But they couldn't even write. I mean, they said, wow, he carves fast when they see me writing. And they're calling me dumb. And I hadn't given my reputation to God at this point. And so finally we went off the air, and boy, they wondered what had happened to the Konings, and they were glad that we were still alive. And they had a new battery, a new aerial, a new radio, and a battery charger. He had that with him, the pilot, and I said, the battery charger. So he took it. This fella, Chuck, the guy with the boat, fixed it. Put this little note on the top, on the spark plug. Otto, don't touch anything, just start it. And I mean, that's hard. But anyway, they had this boat for me for evangelism. Evinrude, 18 horse. Don't get one of those. Well, in a way, when it didn't start, I liked it because I wasn't going anywhere on that boat. I didn't like those crocodiles in the river. It was just a little bit of a boat. I'm not much of a navigator. And I thought, man, as long as that motor doesn't go, I don't go anywhere, And then we get letters. Now, these letters, that's something else. You know, letters from supporters, letters from churches, and saying, Konings, how many souls have you won? You know, how many churches have you planted? Hey, I hadn't even fixed my stove yet. And the expectations are so high. The home church thinks missionaries have, you know, halos and furloughs, I guess. And here, man, so when you write missionaries, give them a break, okay? Now, I had this medical work. Yes, Carol had started it, and then she got sick on me. And so the natives said, give us medicine. And I said, I don't know how to give medicine. And they said, well, Tuan, the box is just inside the shed there. Get the key from Nyonya. Get the key and we'll show you where the medicines are. And they all had favorite colors. They told me which colors they wanted. And I thought, oh, brother, I should have just let them all have a favorite color, and then they wouldn't have been angry at me, I guess. But I said, no, the nurse is sick, no medicine, and that was good for a couple of weeks. But then they said, Tuan, you're eating all the pills yourself. Well, they saw us take vitamins. Pessimists always take vitamins. And so they thought I was eating all the pills myself. So finally they said, Tuan, you're just stingy, you're long-nosed. And finally I said, Carol, I've got to give them medicine. I don't know anything about it. I brought the box inside. She's smart. She took the potent drugs out that I could kill people with. And, you know, the codeine and stuff, and send me out there with the malaria pills and the, you know, the aspirins and whatever, bandages. Taught me how to give shots on a lemon. And so I'm out there, you know, and all these hundreds of people, oh, man, and the flies. I don't know how my wife could stand this. And they all yell at once, and I don't know the language well enough, so we're not communicating at all. It's just noise. And finally, I said, no more of this. I said, you line up all in a straight line. They were all up to 100 a day. And stretch out to the front fence. And I said, now, when you come to my table here, you put your finger where you're sick. Because I said, you know, they point with their chin. They couldn't put your finger. And I said, no talk. I want no. If you talk, you don't get anything. I won't talk, you don't talk. And I said, just, so I tell these guys that they came by and they point here, point here. If it was above the belt, I'd always give them aspirin. If it was below the belt, I'd always give them sulfur. I just took 2 medicines. That's all I worked with. And I just dumped those out on the table and just had a whole pile of it. And I say, point, man. Now, this one man, he says the evil spirit shot him up here and it went below the belt, so he got both. But all the others, I just gave him aspirin and sulfur, and they weren't any of the worst of it. And so, but then, see, these guys with the tropical ulcers, oh, they had these huge tropical ulcers on their thigh, under their arms, and women under their breast, huge open sores. Sometimes the maggots in them are just green in them. And so I had to give them penicillin. So we had to use penicillin G. It's a very, I don't know if they still use it today. It's a very thick thing. You really have to shake those bottles to get that to come on. You have to use the big needles. I like those big needles anyway, because these guys are stealing my pineapples, and I just, you know what I mean? They want a needle, they get it, you know. I didn't sharpen them neither. And they were, but you had to have them for penicillin G. But the amazing thing was, when I gave them that shot, that thing would dry up. They responded to one shot of that, and after about 3 or 4 days, that whole sore would dry up and heal. And that was a miracle to me and to them. And so they said, Tuan, we don't want those pills anymore. We want that powerful medicine, the medicine with the big bite. I guess they meant that big needle. I don't know. And they spat out my medicine. And I said, I hate to see that waste. And they said, Tuan, we want that big needle, and I don't want to give it to them, and they're fighting with me, and I'm standing there with this needle, and they're standing there with a 9-foot spear. What do you think I did? I gave them this shot. I couldn't afford all this penicillin, so I shot them up with water. They didn't know the difference. I shot everybody wanted a shot, got one. Now I didn't hit him. Now my wife would hit him back here somewhere, but there's a lot of wires and arteries, whatever you call back there. And so I had a method. I get them right here in the leg, right here on the, you know, and you have to be careful. You don't hit them so hard that you hit the bone. You got to, but some of them I wanted. I mean, some of them they wanted, they got it. And it left a mark, you know, and they had gotten the big medicine. Now, you medical people, don't fuss up this. This was sterile water. We sterilized the water we put in. So I didn't think it did any good. It didn't do him any harm. I don't know about the needle. But anyway, the most amazing thing happened. And I'm frustrated because I know I'm not doing them any good, and yet, but they're all at least getting something. You see what I mean? But in their minds, Satan so programmed them when they got sick, he had them thinking that they were going to die. But when they had that medicine with the big bite, and they had the mark of that medicine on their leg, they knew, they said, I'm not going to die. I've got the big medicine in me. I'm going to be all right. And they started drinking water again, and they pulled out of it. But, and so it's amazing. I was saving lives. Can you believe it? I didn't think there for a long time I was saving any. I know I was losing some. But, you know, doctors here at home do the same. They lose some. And so, but anyway, oh, man, have you ever had a job that you were totally unprepared to do and frustrated to do? And I begged God to heal my wife so she could have her job back. You know what I mean? And the longer I pled with God and frustrating at the work, God never answered my prayer. You know when he answered my prayer on this medical thing? And finally I said, God, if you want me, because 9 months is a long time for her to be sick. If you want me to do medical work all my life, I'll surrender. That was hard, folks. That was hard for a person who didn't know anything about me. And then I had to look at that sore ulcer or whatever it was, and I dug out spear tips out of their backs without any, can you imagine, without any anesthesia. I pulled their teeth with my pliers without any anesthesia. I delivered babies, I mean complications. It was unreal. And friends, and finally I said, God, I'll do this as unto you. And until I saw, a man came one day and he had this terrible ulcerated leg. And I said, God, Jesus, if that was you, what would I do? I'd give him the best bandages and the best salve, and I'd give him the best penicillin, and I'd treat him. You know, wouldn't you? And when I learned to do it as unto him, that's when I got out of this thing and was able to surrender. And that's when my wife got better, see. And oh, what a rough way to learn, isn't it? That's learning plan B, folks. And I think many of us are learning plan B, you know, experience rather than obedience, plan A. But friends, that's what I get into. Anyway, this fellow came along, and then he was always falling into the fire, and this was a demon-possessed boy, lived next door, and constantly gnashing at me, pulling at his bandages. I'd get him all healed up, he'd fall in the fire again. Oh, start all over again. What a mess he was. I'd get the diapers on the line, glad to get them washed. And then he'd come along with his greasy hair and wipe himself on all the... I would have gladly sacrificed 1 or 2 diapers. He could have... But he'd mess them all up. What? Oh, that got to me. Well, I wasn't going to wash them. I put them on the baby the way they were. I thought, well, he's going to have to toughen up. If he's going to live here. And then went all right until my wife caught me on that one. And then, oh, brother, I had more trouble. Don't marry a nurse. They see too many germs. But see me get up on the windows and scream at our bedroom window in the middle of the night. We'd open the curtains, try to get some air, you know, it's all so humid and so hot. And he'd scream, and oh man, I'd go clear off the bed, you know, and I wouldn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Man, then about 5 o'clock, there's the baby starts screaming again, and the whole scenario again. No wonder my nerves were going bad. Now, my wife can go back to sleep. That made me mad, but she can do that, and that's why she lasted. But, you know, he'd get in my water drum. I had a clean water drum there for kitchen use. We caught the rain off the roof there, the sink roof, and he would steal a piece of soap sometime, and he would get in that drum of nice, clean kitchen water and soap himself up. And he's got all his filthy bandages on them, infections, and he's in my water drum. Oh, man, that got to me. I said, CB, get out of that drum. And I hollered at him and finally got him out of there and threw all that water away. And man, I got to pray now for more water. And I prayed, and that afternoon we had one of them real storms, and man, the whole drum was full again, so praise the Lord, I'm in business again. But the next morning he was in it again. Twice in a row. Oh, that got to me. And finally, You can see now why I hadn't had the rights message. I hadn't surrendered anything. You know, I'm still fighting. If you like that, I'm fighting my own way through, fighting for my rights, pushing and pulling and trying and going down. But the second day he was in it again, I got him out of the drum again, and I'm almost worn out after the medical work anyway. And now I've got to clean this drum and dump it out again, pray for more rain. God gave me more water. Third morning, he's in it again. I hit him. Now, I shouldn't have hit that boy. A missionary should never hit a national. But he couldn't get away. I mean, he's inside the drum, you know, sticking out that far above the drum. I hit him right in the mouth. When I hit that guy, I just lost it. Now, please don't tell me afterwards you weren't a very good missionary. I already know that, okay? But I'm a good confessor. You know, like David, he was a good repenter, right? And that's, God was still, never left me. But, you know, when I hit that boy, there was like fire coming out of his eyes. I mean, the demons. I never been so scared in my life. I mean, it's just like fire coming out. And I ran. And finally, he climbed out the drum himself. And, man, that was my first encounter with this demons. And I was dealing with this boy every day with the medical, see. So this gives you an idea of our start. So I had the physical problems, you know, and my nerves are bad and I don't last. And every day I'm still saying, fine, you know, how you doing, Otto? Fine. And I say, why don't I just confess that I'm a failure? And somehow my pride wouldn't let me do it. Pride will kill you if you keep it up long enough. And so all these things, the physical problem, then the demon possession, and the spiritual problems, then my own besetting sin problems that I was still confessing the same sins over and over again. And so struggle. And then our children get sick. I remember, and we gave our first daughter to the Lord. And that was a part of the pineapple story, surrendering our children to God. Our Debbie got so sick. We had this little lamp. She was just a little child. She was, how old? 6 months, something like that? 9 months old. And so, we had this little oil lamp outside our bed. We had this mosquito net that we had. We were in a native house. And we had this little oil lamp hanging there to get some light. And this baby's fever. And she was just vomiting and she couldn't hold anything down. And it had gotten worse and we have no contact with the coast. So all you have is the Lord to pray to. And we prayed all night. And my wife took her out and bathed her in cold water. And she was getting worse. And by midnight, we had prayed and prayed and prayed. You know how you do? You plead and plead and prayed and pray. And finally, it seems like the prayers wasn't even getting outside of the mosquito net. And finally, the death rattle in her throat. And my wife held that. And I think of it. And finally, you know, I realized that I've got to surrender this child to the Lord. And I said, God, I give you my child. And that was how close it was. You know, I give it to God. That's what I do with the pineapples and everything. I give it to God when I lose it. If we could only learn to turn things over to God before we're losing it, before you lose your health. And so I gave that little, I said to Carol, she said, Otto, pray one more time. She's dying on us. Pray one more time. And she's weeping. And I said, Carol, we've prayed all night, but just to please her, I'll pray. I said, God, dear God, that's about a fine. He says, you know, what happened when you gave the pineapples to me? I said, God, you blessed them. You blessed everything I ever gave you. What happened when you gave your time to me? And I said, God, you blessed my time. And now I said, God, you take the baby. And I said, Carol, this isn't a time for prayer. This is a time for surrender. I said, Carol, give the baby to God. Give her while you still have her. And she understood. And she held that baby up. And in the dimness of that light from the little oil lamp, she says, God, I give you my child. I give it to her. Give her to you before she dies. And I'm praying, God, your child is dying. As if he didn't know what foolishness was that. And you know, and as if he needs a warning. God takes good care of his property. Remember that. And that child started to breathe better. And the death rattle went out of her throat. And she started to breathe. And she seemed to be coming out of it. And she soon started to drink from her mother's breast. And it was amazing. And she didn't vomit again. We were both so emotionally drained that we fell asleep, but the little lamp was still on. In the morning, I woke up, and that thing was just a little blue flame, burned all the kerosene out of it. And when we were so tired, first thing I thought of, your daughter died. Your daughter died last night. And I didn't want to confirm it by opening my eyes, but finally I had to. And I felt, and she was in between us in bed, and I felt in her chest was just going up and down, breathing like normal. And she was ready to eat, and God healed that child. But wow, that's waiting too long, folks. Let's give them to God while we still have them to give. Well, our son, that little fella, the next one was born. No, the oldest son. We were in Bandung, Java, and that's a story in itself. But there, the driving is notorious. There's no stop streets or no stop lights. It's survival of the fittest. Whoever's the bravest. And my son's out there with his bicycle, okay, and these motorcycles and scooters all over the place. And he got hit by a motorcycle and broke his collarbone. I had to send him to school on one of them betches, one of them old taxis. They're the old panel trucks from America that they ship over. I don't know where they come from. They were GMCs and Chevs and Fords, and they were so rusted, so bad. They had to pump the brakes to get them to stop. They had to go up a mountain to the school where my son went to school. And I had to put him on that, and later my daughter's on that thing. And I thought, you lucky people are riding with my kids, you'll probably make it. But I was still given to anxiety. Hadn't surrendered that to the Lord. Anyway, they had a plastic jerry can in the cab, usually on the passenger side. See, the tanks had rusted long ago, so the little plastic line to the fuel pump. And that's how they pumped it up out of there. And they're sitting there with that thing bouncing around in the cab. And then they're sitting there smoking their cigarettes. I mean, it's unreal. And so you learn to surrender your kids to the Lord. Well, my son ended up in that Seventh-day Adventist hospital, and they took good care of him there, dear people. And I sat in that hospital with him many times, and they came with these whole loads of people that had gone over the cliff and missed a turn, and all these wounded people, and it really shakes you up. But anyway, at that night, I gave my oldest son to the Lord. I said, God, I can't keep this lad any longer. There's no way. I'm giving him to you just like I give Debbie to you. And so now 2 of my 4 children were in the Lord's hands, and I wish I should have given them all, that. But yeah, I wasn't losing the others yet, you know what I mean? So I hang on to things as long as I can before I lose them. So the third one I gave to God. That little boy, oh man, he was, I can't describe all. He was so sick. And we went on this little bicycle taxi in the middle of the night, took him to that same Seventh-day Adventist doctor, and he said to me next morning, he says, when you brought Charles in, I thought that he wouldn't make it through the night. He says, I was afraid for you, but he says, God's been good. That doctor and I knelt beside that little boy and prayed our hearts out that night. Anyway, but that one girl of mine, Jessie, she would never get sick, so I could never give her to God. And so I worried about Jessie quite a bit. And finally I said, God, she doesn't need to get sick, and I gave her to. Now, I had to remember to give these kids to God every day. And that gave me a whole lot of peace. But then my wife gets sick. Now, I've only got one of those. And I knew what God was saying. Hey, are you willing to put her on the altar and give her to me? And I said, God, I can't make it here without her. She's a stabilizing force in our family. I can't raise these kids alone. And I've given God all these sob stories. I'm playing, please heal my wife. And then I had a chance to get her to a doctor. It came out, there was a flight. I sent her to the doctor. And the doctor says, I can't do anything for her, Otto. Prepare for her death. I don't see any way. She isn't responding, and she was really sick. And what do you think I did? When I was losing her, I quick gave her to God before I said, God, I'm giving her to you. She's better off with you than with me. Anyway, I know that. I'm a pretty good husband, but I'm sure that God could take better care of her than I can. And so I gave her to God, and I've got her here today. How many lessons do we learn? How many experiences do we need to go through before we surrender, folks? Surrender is the hard way to learn. You will learn. And Oh, it's that way in all these areas of our... Remember in the pineapple story, I talked about the possessions, giving it to God. And then on the second tape there, on God's Grade School, I talked about the time, giving time to God, and then reputation. But then there's these other areas that came up, and one was family that I just described to you. And then there's health. When you're hurting, then you give your health to God. You surrender your right to be healthy. And I preached this once in New Hampshire. And there was a church way up there by the White Mountains. There was this big Baptist deacon sitting on the aisle. He couldn't bend his knee. He had a stiff leg. He had something. He'd been to many doctors, couldn't get healing. And when I told this story, he surrendered his right to be healthy. He said, God, I'll be the best bad need guy you've ever had serving you. That's the kind of thing God wants to hear. If we're not willing to say that, you'll not likely get healed. I say that to all pastors and leaders of churches. Don't anoint people with oil and pray over them until they surrender their right to be healthy. Because that's likely why God's got them hurting, for them to surrender. That's how God works with us Christians. And so he gave his health to God. He said, God, I'll serve you with this. He had to have a long shoehorn, on a stick to get his shoe on. He couldn't fly his plane anymore. He had a little plane, and he said he couldn't push the pedals anymore. And so that Wednesday night, he gave his health to God, especially his knee and his leg. And we were there for dinner, the pastor and I, on the Friday night, 2 days later. And he took us out to he had a flagstone walk. A root had pushed a flagstone up. He tripped on that root the day before, Thursday. And he says, guess where I hit? Right on my bad knee. And he says, I was sitting there on that flag. He took us right out. I was sitting on this stone, rubbing my knee. I thought I was going to lose my whole leg. And he says, I had given my knee to God the day before, and it looked like that was the wrong thing to do, wasn't it? He says, I thought about it. He said, God, I gave you my knee. I gave you my whole leg. You've got a right to take it. It looks like that's what you're going to do. And he says, as I rubbed my knee like this, he said, as I rubbed my knee, he said, I mend it. God, I mend it. He says, that's right. He says, finally, I had to get up. I couldn't sit there all day. So he says, by the time I got to the front door, he says, Mr. Koning, you know what? I could bend that knee. He says, when my knee hit that rock, something went into place or something went right, and God healed my knee. I said, no, he didn't. He says, yes, look, he did. I said, no, the timing. He says, he didn't heal your knee when you hit the rock. He says, well, what do you mean? I said, he healed your knee when you showed him that you were serious about him and you weren't bitter against him. And when you said, I mend it, and you stuck with God and you said, God, you can have the whole leg, I'm still with you, I mend it. That's when God healed your knee. He says, I guess that's right. And so I've told this story in many places. And wherever I get on this area of health, now, you know what the verse of Scripture is. It's on that verse where Paul has his thorn in the flesh, and he prays 3 times, remember, for God to remove that thorn. And God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you, Paul. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. And then Paul has this terrific answer. He says, most gladly will I therefore glory in my infirmity, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And what would you rather have, the power of Christ or perfect health? You say, that I don't like that question. I don't need it. But that's what Paul faced. And he never prayed again. He said 3 times. And then he left it and said, okay, God, use me. And maybe because of that problem, he was usable. Maybe otherwise he'd been too proud. And so God could use him more than any other apostle, maybe than any other person ever lived, because he learned to live with his problem and rejoice in his problem. And so I want you to know that when you surrender an area to God, that doesn't mean that everything's going to turn to gold and everything's going to be. God has a choice. Joni Eareckson Tada, remember that girl? Paralyzed from her neck down at 17, I believe. And she says herself, I prayed and at first bitter against God, then prayed. And do you think she's still praying for God to heal her? No, you read her book, you listen to her radio program, she is not asking God to heal her anymore. She says, God, use me. Now that's surrender. And look how God is using that woman today. It's been about 17, 18 years now. And I look forward to the day God's going to heal her completely. He could do that. Some people say, well, no, she's so used of God. God could put somebody else in her place, couldn't he? But, when God's seen that faithfulness, and yet she may be that way the rest of her life. But God doesn't always answer your prayer. If you surrender your right to be healthy, and you say, I quit praying about it, quit struggling, quit fighting, quit being bitter, and you leave it with God, that doesn't mean that it's going to turn out all right. Now, when I give my pineapples to God, I got more pineapples. I still get more pineapples than I want. When I give my time to God, God increased my time. When I give my reputation to God, God exalted me. But here on this one, you give your health to God, doesn't mean God's going to heal you. So I want you to know that. But I've been preaching this all over the country. You know what's happening? 95% of the people that surrender their right to be healthy become healed. Now that shows you that about that many people that they suffer because the Lord is trying them and drawing them to himself and bringing them to the end of their rope so that they can surrender. He's giving them an opportunity to surrender their rights. And that many get healed. Now, I'm not a faith healer or anything, but people get healed when they surrender their rights. That's such a beautiful, amazing thing. And then there's the other area of talents. And I want to talk this to you because so many of you are young. Talents. If you do not surrender your talents to the glory of God, if you don't give God the glory for what you have going for you, you're inviting God to take it from you. It's a pride thing. I had a buddy in high school, and he was a long-distance runner. He became good at it, long-distance running. He was winning prizes. And then he was a Christian, and he went to church with me. But then came the place where the track meets start to meet on Sunday morning, and he had a choice to make. Is he going to stay coming to church and learn about God, or is he going? And he made the wrong decision. He dropped out of church, got away from the Lord, and became a greater runner. And then he was in a terrible car accident. He lost one leg. They had to amputate it. He never ran again. But you know what? He was back in church again with his one leg. Hey, give God the glory for what you... I met a young woman in Kentucky. She asked me the strangest question. She says, Mr. Koning, she had heard me several meetings. Can you believe that I won a beauty contest my junior year in high school? Boy, that's a hard question to answer. I can't lie. And I can't, and I hesitated. She says, go ahead and say it. You can't believe it. Everybody, see, and this dear lady, she's now in her 30s. She had scars. She had all kinds of, she looked bad. Besides that, she was grossly overweight, and she looked bad, and she was weeping. She says, Mr. Koning, I wish I'd heard this message so long ago. And she said, I did win the beauty contest. And when I stood on the center with the runner-ups beside me, I knew that I should give God the glory because I had, thought of that. And everybody said, if you win it, you got it. And so I knew I should speak for the Lord. But he says, we're in a rural school. And all the villages around, this was rural country, and all the people know each other. And everybody goes to this school. So everybody was at this contest. And he says, there was all my friends and all the neighbors and everybody there. And I just got so scared. And so I didn't say anything about the Lord. And I just didn't give him the glory. And it kind of took all the glory for myself. And everybody clapped and cheered. And she says, oh, I felt so miserable. I knew I let the Lord down, and I asked him his forgiveness. And I said to him, God, if you allow me to win it one more time, I'll speak for you. And that's exactly what happened her senior year in high school. She won the beauty contest again. And now she stood there again, and she had a talk for God, and she was petrified again, and she didn't do it again. And now she said, I knew God was angry at me, and he would never forgive me again. And he says, I was so sick of myself, and I was so down on myself for chickening out like that. And she says, I got away from the Lord then and never went to church anymore, and ran around with the wrong crowd. Married one of them, got into a bad marriage. He used to beat me. That's some of the scars you see. I was in accidents because he was drunk driving. And she says, my life just went bad and worse, and my emotions were all shot, and I overate, and that's how I got to be. You know, she didn't give God the glory for what she's got going. She lost it all. And that's the way it is with talents and sports or whatever you're better at than if you can run that computer better than everybody else, and everybody else knows it, be careful, be careful. You've got to give God the glory. You can't take glory for yourself. And all of us are made that we can do something better than somebody else. And this is so... by the way, I met this lady again about several years later, and she had lost considerable weight. She had put to practice the things. She'd been to the seminar then and put to practice some of these things, starting to believe it, lost weight. There's a smile on her face. I said, you're going the right direction. I didn't even recognize her. She says, I'm the lady, you remember? And I said, good for you. You're going along. She says, I'm living for the Lord. Praise the Lord. There is forgiveness with God, but this area is very... It's an amazing area. Then the area of our future, giving our future to God. If you give your future to God, you know, some people are afraid to do this. They say, if I give my future to God, surely he will send me to those cannibals and headhunters Mr. Koning's been talking about, you know. Or, you know, he'd put me in the worst place if I left it to him. Now, that's Satan's lie. You don't go for... You resist that lie. You don't listen to Satan's lies that way. Some people say, well... if I give my future to God, I'll probably, oh man, will I have any money to live on? Will I, you know, people worry about their retirement if they give it to you. Friends, you can't give to God. Let him control, and he works things out for you. Oh, there's I don't know what I told you that story about that 1938 Buick in Ecuador. There was a dear missionary family owned in 1938. This was many years ago, but that was probably back in the 50s. The missionaries told me. He said, we were driving, we had to cross the Andes Mountains. He says, they're high and sharp turns. And he says, our old car broke down. He says, there was something wrong with the brakes or something in the wheel. And he says, I didn't dare go down the mountain with this one broken brake drum shoe, whatever. And he says, we were there, and my family and I, we were praying, and another car came along. We were on a turn. It was very dangerous. And the other driver says, come on, let's push the car. Let's get it down to a safer place. You're going to get hit on this turn. This is a very dangerous spot. So he says, he helped us, and we got it down to a safer spot. And there we parked, and there we prayed, and got the kids together and pray, and we didn't. There was nothing I could do. I took that. We needed new brake shoes or whatever, parts. And we prayed.